Welcome back to TaraChessAcademy. Today we're going to discuss types of ideas in the endgame.
Hi everyone! Today we prepared very interesting end games for you. And the first idea that we're going to discuss today is a breakthrough. So you can see an end game, that for the first look is equal. So white has 3 pawns against 3 black pawns, and probably even position of the black's king is better because the king is closer to the pawns, right? So in this position we play for white and we have to find a winning plan, yeah. So let's think if it's possible to win in this position. So 3 pawns against 3 pawns. Maybe you will find an interesting breakthrough and even a sacrifice. So by the way, you can also stop the video and try to find the right solution by yourself. So Tara, what ideas do you have?
I think that h6 or f6 wouldn't work because
Let's
then
discuss this too. So of course it's impossible to ignore this move, because we just capture the pawn and promote. So, but what if the pawn just captures? Probably we have to take it back, and I think that the king has enough time to capture both of the pawns, and the endgame would be winning for black. So, and the same happens if we start with f6. So these 2 moves don't work. So what else can we try?
So the only move here would be g6, and we're going to see why.
G6. So again, it's impossible to ignore this move because now white pawn can capture both of the pawns, and promote. So that's why f6 or h6 would be very bad for black. So that's why the only right answer in this position is capture. Okay, so what happens if f7 captures g6?
Now we had to try and make a pawn sacrifice, but we have to be careful in which one we do.
So probably it could be a good plan to create a passed pawn, the pawns that couldn't be stopped or blocked by pawns of opponent, So, but of course, if we start with f6, so no passed pawn anymore. So probably we can try to deflect the pawn on g7. So what ideas do you have?
So that's why we have to play h6.
H6. So again, if the pawn captures, f5 becomes a passed pawn, and after f6, the pawn promotes, and this position is absolutely winning. Okay, so let's go back. And of course, if instead of taking the pawn on h6, black tries to capture f5 pawn, we just capture and we still have a passed pawn. But let's discuss another possible variations. What happens if h7 captures g6? So f5 probably couldn't be a passed pawn in this position. So h5 should be a passed pawn. So what should we do? By the way, you still can try yourself and think how to play for white in this position. So Tara, what would you do?
Let's see what happens if you try to play h6. Is it a good idea?
H6. To be honest, I'm not sure because just the pawn captures.
So that's why in that position you have to play f6.
Of course. So when we play f6, again we use deflection idea, so g7 captures and we play h6. Okay, so it was an interesting end game with breakthrough idea. Try to memorize it because it can help you to win many games. So g6 is a winning move. I hope that this idea is clear for you, and now we go to the next end game. Today we're also going to discuss an opposition. And the first end game that we discuss is an example how you can use an opposition for winning the game. Opposition means that the kings are in front of each other and there is one square between them. But of course in chess there are different types of the opposition. So diagonal opposition, also it could be long opposition, when you see 3 squares between the kings, so and etc. etc. So, but we today discuss the most simple examples of the opposition. So, of course, if you want to get a winning position, the pawn should stay behind the king. And the plan for black is to improve position of the king and try to get to the second rank. So, e1 in this position is the square where pawn gonna promote, so it means that we have to help it, yeah, and probably have the king on f2, e2, or d2. If we just try to move the king first, yeah, probably white gonna follow the king, so we can't move it forward to the fourth rank, yeah, because the white king blocks it. So
And
probably the king
remember,
move is not the right.
two kings can never touch each other.
Yeah.
You can think of it like a stinky breath situation.
Yeah. So what should we start with? Tara, what ideas do you have?
You saw that a king move wasn't good, so maybe you can try e6.
Yeah, so it's just a wait and move. Now white king has to move away from the opposition, yeah? So it moves to f3 or d3, and it means that we can move the black king forward. So for example, if king d3, where would we move the black king in this position?
We can move the king to f4.
Yeah, so we use an opposition. Yeah, it's in our hands, and we want to use it and move the king closer to the second rank. Okay, so of course, white shouldn't give up. Yeah, king moves to e2. What is the plan? Again, to stay in front of the black king, to use an opposition and get to f2. So should we move the pawn, or we still should try to improve position of the black king first?
I think we should improve the position of the king because if you play e5, they can get the opposition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, yeah, it's not good, yeah, if we try to push the pawn on the same rank with the king, yeah. It's too early to do this, and this position is a draw. It's impossible to win. So, as Tara said, yeah, in this position, we still should try to improve position of the king. So, Tara, where should black move the king?
We can move our king to e4.
Of course. Again, white has to move away from the opposition, yet to move the king away. So if king f2,
We can
how
move our
should we
king to
play?
d3.
Yeah, of course, king to d3. Now I think I'm gonna play king f3 for white. Yeah, and of course in this position, we should be careful. We shouldn't forget about pawn's safety. Yeah, because if now we try to control e1, yeah, so probably we'll lose the pawn, and now it's draw position. Yeah, so now finally it's time to move the pawn. So we play e5, yeah, king f2. Probably there is no sense to play king d2, yeah, because we just waste our time, yeah, because now we have to play king d3, avoiding losing the pawn, yeah. So in this position, we still can push the pawn to e4, king e1, and now, yeah, it's a very important position in this endgame. So if you make the wrong move, it will be a draw. Yeah, if you make the right move, it's still possible to win. So we have a choice between king e3 or pawn e3. So let's think which move would be better. What do you think, Tara?
So if you move the pawn to e3, they'll move the king to d1.
Hmm.
And then
We
after
try
the
to
pawn
promote.
e2, the king blocks, and then king e3, it will be a draw.
Stalemate. Yeah. So let's go back. Okay, so what is the correct move for black in this position?
We want to move our king in front of the pawn, so we move our king to e3.
Yeah, of course. Again, we use an opposition here, so white has to move away. For example, king f1, and we just play king d2. The pawn promotes without any problems. Yeah, and it's an absolutely winning endgame for black. Okay, I hope that you understand how to use an opposition if you want to win. Yeah, just try to memorize several simple rules. Yeah, the king should be, the pawn should stay behind the king. Yeah, and just try to control the square where the pawn gonna promote. So now probably we can go to the next endgame. Yeah, we're still gonna use an opposition, but this time for making a draw. We play for black. And you see that white probably forgot that the pawn should stay behind the king. You see that the king and the pawn are at the same rank, yeah, the third rank. So let's see if it's possible for white to win. Yeah, unfortunately, white can't improve position for the king. Yeah, white can't move it forward. So in this position, I think white gonna push the pawn. Yeah, d4. So Tara, where would you move the black king in this position? Let's think.
You can move the king to d5.
Yeah, so we can just block the pawn. Yeah. Of course, if white doesn't want to lose the pawn, there is just one possible move, king d3. And now you have to calculate, you have to think for one move, yeah? So the next move probably will be king e4 or king c4. And it would be great if your king would be able to stay in front of the white king. So if it would be able to get to e6 or c6. Yeah, so if you calculate this, it wouldn't be a problem for you to find the next move for the black king. Yeah, so where should we move the black king in this position?
I think we should move the king to d6.
Of course, yeah, because now if king e4, we have king e6, yeah. If the white king moves to c4, we just play king c6, yeah. So in both positions, there is an opposition here. Okay, so d5 check. Where would you move the king?
Now the king blocks the pawn with d6.
Of course, king d4, yeah. So where to move the king?
Now you move the king down to d7.
Of course. So king e5, yeah. Opposition, we just stay in front of the king and block it. So d6, yeah. So you can try to check yourself, yeah. So I hope that you memorize where to move the king. Yeah, so we just block the pawn. Yeah, and where to move the king in this position? Would it be good for us if we move it to c8 or e8? I
It
don't
wouldn't
think
be
so,
because then they could get the opposition.
of course. Yeah.
So the rule is to move the king straight back.
Mm-hmm.
So we should move the king to d8.
Of course. So king c6, we just move in front. Yeah, king c8, d7, and you have already seen a similar position in the previous endgame. Yeah, so we block the pawn, and if white doesn't want to lose the pawn, there is just one move, king to d6, and it's a stalemate. Yeah, so it's a draw. It's impossible to win this endgame for white. Okay, well done. So I hope that you enjoyed this end game. Yeah, it was an example how opposition can save the game. Yeah, and how you can make a draw. So let's go to the next one. So we also decided, prepared some information for you about activity of the king in the end game. Yeah, end game means that so some pieces have already gone from the chessboard. Yeah, because of exchange, tradings, and usually the king is not a weak piece anymore. Usually in the end game, kings become strong pieces. So that's why sometimes you don't have to hide your king behind the pawns anymore. Yeah, usually we try to move it closer to the center. Of course, there are some exceptions to the rules, especially if you have queens and rooks end games. Yeah, so try to hide your king if you don't want to be mated. Yeah. So we decided to show you this example with rooks, knights, and bishops on the chessboard. Yeah, it's a typical mistake for beginners. So just to castle every time when it's possible. Yeah, but sometimes you don't have to castle, or you can castle, but you have to choose the right way to castle. Yeah. So in this position, yeah, of course, it's an endgame, and probably we can try to leave the white king at the center. So what happens if I move it to e2? I don't like answer bishop c4. Yeah. If I try to move it to d2, I don't like that. Yeah, maybe it's possible to castle with check. Yeah. So it looks like e2 and d2 is not the best position for the king. So, but of course, I want to connect my rooks. Yeah. What can I do? I can try to castle to the king side. So let's think if it would be good for me. So Tara, what do you think about this move? Was it good for me to castle to the king side?
I think it's not very good to castle to the king side because now the king is further away from the center, so it'll be hard to activate it.
Yeah, so probably in this position, what would be your future plan? You will move the rook to e1 or d1 and still will try to move your king closer to the center. Or you will play f3 and move your king to f2. So that's why castle to the king side just looks like wasting of time. Yeah, so this position is an exception to the rules. Yeah, probably castle to the king side is not a good plan. But what if we try castle to the queen side? What do you think, Tara?
I think now that the king is closer to the center, because later could go easily to d2.
Of course, we can move it to d2, to d3, or maybe to e3, it depends. And also, I like castle to the queen side because at the same time we control an open file, yeah, which is good for us. And by the way, now it's impossible for black to castle to the queen side, yeah? And of course, it still wouldn't be good for black to castle to the king side, yeah? King e7 maybe is also not the best plan because we have bishop c5 in this position, yeah? So we make more problems for black after this castle, yeah? So black can't easily just solve this problem with a king, yeah? It takes more than one move. So that's why, yes, sometimes when you see that you can castle and if you understand that it's already an end game on the chessboard, yeah, just be careful and think twice if it would be so important for you to hide the king behind the pawns and move it far away from the center. Okay, I hope that you understand this plan. Let's go to the next endgame. Okay, we prepared this endgame. Yeah, I think we can just say several words about it. Yeah, so this endgame is an example of a passed pawn. Yeah, you see that black already has a passed pawn on before at the queen side. So let's just say several words. What could be possible plans for black in this position? Yeah, so first of all, maybe we can try to create a passed pawn on h4. Tara, what do you think?
I think we could try, that could be an idea, and maybe later we could go g5 and try to make a pass pawn.
Yeah, of course. So, of course, if you see that it would be a good plan, yeah, if, for example, white doesn't play king f1 and king g2 before, yeah, because your pawn would be undefended. Yeah, we can try to create one more passed pawn, playing g5 and h4. And also, I think for some reason, it would be very nice for us to move the pawns away from the light squares. Tara, could you explain to us, please, why it could be good for black in this position to move the pawns to the dark squares, for example?
Why? Because they have a light square bishop, so if we move it to dark squares, then they won't be able to target there.
Mhm. Yeah, of course. It's also one rule about bishops and games. Yeah, if you see that your opponent has a bishop, yeah, try to put your pawns on a different color squares. Yeah, so because if you move these pawns to the dark squares, it means that the bishop can't attack them. Yeah, and of course, maybe later black can also improve position for the king. Yeah, it depends. Maybe black can move it to the queen side, yeah, and help this pawn to promote. And of course, if you create a new passed pawn for yourself, yeah, and later play h4, of course, after g5, yeah, maybe you can also move the king to the king side. Yeah. Okay, so let's go to the next position. Yeah, so you see, today we discussed different end games with different pieces like rooks, bishops, knights, kings, and pawns. Yeah, so we also prepared an interesting position for you. So white has an extra pawn, yeah, passed pawn that is already at the 7th rank. And this endgame is tricky because it depends which turns to move. So if it's white's turn to move, it's a winning position for white. But if it's black's turn to move, it would be a draw endgame. So first, let's discuss what happens if it's white's turn to move. Yeah, we don't have time just to move the rook somewhere. Yeah, for example, to b8, because then black just captures the pawn. No pawn, no win. Yeah. Unfortunately, we don't have any good checks, yeah, because the king is at the 7th rank, so we can't move the rook to f8 with check because it doesn't make any sense. We just lose the position. So Tara, I think I need your help. How does white win this endgame?
Maybe we can move the rook to h8.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. So yeah, if we start with rook h8 in this position, we want to promote, yeah, and if black just captures the pawn, what happens?
Now there's a skewer of rook h7.
Yeah, so we just play rook h7. Okay, well done. Yeah, so try to memorize this plan. And of course, if you have this position for black, don't move your king at the 6th rank, yeah? Because, for example, with a king at the 6th rank, it's much easier to win. Just rook e8, yeah, and black can resign. Okay, and now let's discuss this endgame if it's black's turn to move. So you already know the winning plan for white. If white has enough time to play rook h8, yeah, so black loses this position. So how can we prevent this plan? How can we make a draw for black? So Tara, what ideas do you have?
The rook could just keep checking the king.
Okay, we can keep checking the king, yeah? We can try this plan, let's see if it's work, yeah? But I think finally the white king gonna attack the rook, yeah? And when you move your rook somewhere, maybe we still have chance to play rook h8. So maybe checking the king is not the best plan. Maybe it's better for black to control h8. What do you think?
The rook could go to h2.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if the rook goes to h2, yeah, I think then white just has time for playing rook b8, for example, because a pawn is not attacked anymore, yeah? So probably it could be a king move. What do you think?
We could move the king to g7.
Of course, so if black wants to make a draw in this position, it would be just enough to move the king on these two squares, g7 and h7. So this plan with rook h8 is not possible anymore. Yeah, and even if white tries to move the king closer, yeah, and attack the rook, this plan doesn't work. Yeah, so let me give you an example. Let me explain to you why this plan doesn't work. Yeah, because even if you try to Oh, sorry, I just played king h7 and blundered my rook. Yeah, so rook goes to a1. So of course, even if the white king tries to get to b6 in this position, so what is the plan? To protect the pawn and then to move the rook away and promote. So it still doesn't work just because black has some checks for the king. Yeah, and you see that the king has to move away. Yeah, so we still move the rook here, and there is no winning plans for white anymore. So just move your king on g7 and h7, and don't lose your rook, don't blunder it. Okay, so I hope that everything was clear for you, and we can go to the next endgame. Yeah. So also today we prepared some endgames where you can see how skewers work. Yeah. So for the first look, position is equal, yeah? So white and black has passed pawns and probably black even promotes first, yeah? But let's think what happens after we got queens on the chessboard. So a6, h2, a7, h1 queen, and now white promotes too. So Tara, could you say several words, please?
So now it turns out that when the pawn on a8 promoted, it gave a check. And now when the black king moves, then we can capture the queen. That would be a
Yeah,
skewer.
of course. So the king moves away and we get the queen, and an endgame is absolutely winning. So it means that even if you think that position is equal, just don't give up, try to calculate, yeah, because maybe there are some tricks in the position. So let's go to the next example. So position still looks yeah, like equal. So white has a pawn, black has a pawn, and we promote the same time without any checks. Yeah, so queen, queen. But what happens then? Let's think together. So maybe Tara, you can help us.
What would you do if your opponent would offer a draw here? You think that it's completely equal, that queen versus queen, or rook versus rook. But sometimes there could be some exceptions, like here.
Okay,
Because
so
now,
what should we start
because,
with?
because now white can try and force a skewer with a check.
I know, I have to play queen d5, yeah?
It's not just any check that you play, because the king could go to f6 and stop the skewer.
Okay, so what should we do?
That's why we have to move our queen to e8. We had to be careful of which check.
So the black king can't move to d-file, to d6, d5, or d4, right? So no matter where it moves, to f6, to f5, or to f4, what happens?
Then there's a skewer of queen c8.
Queen f8, yeah?
Queen f8.
Yeah, or also we can play queen f7, right? So no big difference between these moves. Yeah, and of course, then we get the queen, and of course, we win the game. So yeah, Tara said very important information that even if you think that position is equal, so don't think that it's a draw. Yeah, try to calculate, try to find some tricks in the position. Okay, so yeah, interesting example of a skewer. Okay, also we would like to say several words about king's activity. Yeah. So in this position, you see that black is ready to capture the white pawn. Yeah, so let's think what can white do? Would it be so important for white to push the pawns, or it's better to move the king first? So what do you think, Tara?
I think it's better to move the king because if we move the king, then the king could capture the pawns, and then it'll be easier for our pawns to promote because they don't have any pawns.
Okay, so but where should I move the king? To g4 or maybe to e4? Where would be better to move it?
I think you should move to e4.
Yeah, of course. So because if we try to play king g4, yeah, we can't get to any of these squares. So we have to try to get maybe like this, yeah, to e7. So if I start with g4, I can't do this. Yeah, so black captures and we just move the king closer to the pawns, yeah, and unfortunately for black, yeah, it's impossible to stop the king. Even if the pawns try to escape, yeah, I think we still can get them. Yeah. Okay, so activity of the king is very important. Yeah, and the last position for today, yeah, it's also an example of the passed pawn, but now it's a protected passed pawn, yeah. So the black king can't get anywhere from the fifth rank, yeah, if it tries to get closer, the white pawn promotes. So it's very good that the black king can't move anywhere, so it has just a little space. So what should we do in this position, Tara?
I think we should move the king because you learned that the king is considered a fighting piece in the endgame.
So, but where should we move it? We should move it closer to the pawn and help it to promote, or we should capture the black pawn first?
Maybe we can capture the pawn first.
Yeah, so I think we can try this plan. Yeah, and while the black king is moving like on several squares, yeah, we just capture the pawn, yeah, and then our plan is to get closer and help our b pawn to promote. Yeah. So I think we can try something like this maybe. And of course, this endgame is winning for white. You don't have even to use an opposition ideas, yes, so I think you can just, the easiest plan is just to capture the pawn, yeah, and your position is absolutely winning. Okay, so I hope that all these end games and all this information that we gave for you gonna help you to win many games.
I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video to others. And I'll see you on my next video. Bye!
Bye!